Welcome to a moment of calm. You don't need to do anything. Just get comfortable. Breathe slowly and let this story gently guide you to sleep. Let us know in the comments how many minutes it took you to fall asleep. Sweet dreams. What disturbs the night most deeply is rarely the sound of the world outside. It is the quiet, persistent noise that arises within when everything else finally becomes still. When movement ends and attention is no longer pulled outward, the mind begins to speak in a softer but more insistent way. Thoughts that had no space during the day step forward, not loudly, but steadily, as if they had been waiting for this precise moment. During waking hours, life provides structure. Tasks demand response. Conversations require presence. Decisions follow one another without pause. In that constant rhythm, the inner world is kept moving by necessity. There is little time to remain with what is unfinished, unresolved, or emotionally unclear. The mind stays occupied, and what cannot be addressed is temporarily set aside, not because it has disappeared, but because there is no room for it yet. Night quietly changes that arrangement. As the day withdraws, external demands loosen their grip. The body recognizes fatigue and begins to slow, but the mind does not always follow at the same pace. Freed from immediate obligation, it turns inward. What was postponed begins to surface, not as a clear sequence, but as fragments, memories, concerns, sensations, questions without simple answers. They arrive without warning, shaped by tiredness rather than intention. This experience often feels unsettling because it appears uninvited. The silence of the night amplifies what was previously muted. Without distraction, thoughts echo more clearly, and their presence can be mistaken for urgency or danger. Yet what appears now is not new. It is simply no longer hidden by activity. Many interpret this moment as failure. The inability to rest, the refusal of the mind to quiet down, the sense that something is wrong. This interpretation adds a second layer of tension to an already sensitive state. The truth is more subtle. A mind that continues to speak at night is not broken. It is tired, and fatigue alters perception. When the mind is exhausted, it becomes more inclined to create meaning where clarity is lacking. It connects fragments into narratives that feel coherent but remain incomplete. These inner stories carry emotional weight, not because they are accurate, but because the mind lacks the energy to question them. In this state, thoughts feel convincing, immediate, and personal, even when they are shaped more by weariness than reality. This is not weakness. It is a natural response to prolonged effort without sufficient release. The mind, like the body, has limits. When those limits are reached, its ability to measure proportion diminishes. Small uncertainties expand. Ordinary concerns take on disproportionate importance. The inner voice grows more active, precisely because it has been silent for too long. What makes the night particularly vulnerable is not the presence of thoughts, but the absence of resistance elsewhere. During the day, attention is defended by action. At night, that defense dissolves. The mind finds itself alone with its contents, and without guidance, it attempts to manage everything at once. Yet the appearance of these thoughts does not demand action. They do not require immediate resolution. They are signals, not commands. Their intensity reflects the condition of the mind, not the truth of what they describe. Recognizing this distinction softens their authority. Awareness does not mean suppression. It does not ask for silence, control, or order. It simply notices what is present without granting it power. When thoughts are seen rather than followed, their urgency begins to loosen. They may continue to appear, but they no longer dictate the direction of attention. The night does not ask you to fix what emerges. It offers a different invitation: to observe without engaging, to allow the mind to express what it carries without turning that expression into obligation. When resistance fades, a subtle shift occurs. The inner noise remains, but it loses its sharp edges. It moves to the background rather than occupying the center. In this space, rest does not arrive as the absence of thought, but as the absence of struggle. Peace begins not when the mind falls silent, but when it is no longer treated as a threat. What surfaces can be acknowledged without judgment, allowed without pursuit, and left without conclusion. The quiet noise of the mind is not an enemy of rest. It is often the final release of a day that has demanded too much. And when it is met with understanding rather than resistance, it gradually loses the need to insist. This is where the night truly begins, not in darkness, but in the gentle recognition that nothing needs to be solved right now, and nothing needs to be carried further into this moment. When the day reaches its end, it rarely stops all at once. It does not collapse into silence or shut itself down abruptly. Instead, it loosens its hold little by little, as if it understands that it has already fulfilled its role. Light softens. Sounds lose their sharp edges. Movement slows without instruction. The body receives subtle signals that vigilance is no longer required, and it begins to respond naturally. Muscles release what they have been holding. Breathing changes its rhythm without conscious effort. The posture shifts. The nervous system gradually steps away from urgency. The outer world, which demanded constant attention hours before, begins to withdraw. It asks less. It expects less. It leaves space behind. Yet the mind often moves in the opposite direction. As external demands fade, inner activity begins to rise. What was contained by schedules, responsibilities, and constant engagement now finds room to unfold. During the day, attention is pulled outward by necessity. There are tasks to complete, roles to fulfill, conversations to manage, decisions that require immediate response. Thought follows function. It remains practical, directional, and contained. When those structures dissolve, the mind is no longer guided by external urgency. Left without a clear task, it turns inward. This shift can feel sudden, even intrusive, though it has been preparing all along. What emerges is not orderly or deliberate. It comes in fragments, shaped less by logic than by residue. Thoughts surface that were postponed rather than resolved. Concerns that had no place during the day return without context. Images replay without intention. Conversations echo long after they ended. Anticipations of tomorrow quietly begin to form. None of this appears because it must be addressed now. It appears because it finally can. This moment is often misunderstood. It is easy to believe that the mind becomes restless at night because something has gone wrong. In reality, the opposite is often true. The mind has been active all day. It has simply been directed elsewhere. Night does not create this movement. It reveals it. The body, meanwhile, follows a different logic. It responds directly to fatigue. When energy lowers, it naturally seeks stillness. It does not question the need to rest. It does not analyze tomorrow. It simply releases. The mind, however, does not always recognize exhaustion in the same way. Instead of slowing, it compensates. It attempts to organize, anticipate, and resolve, as if continued effort could protect against uncertainty. This creates a quiet conflict. The body asks for release. The mind insists on continuation. In this imbalance, rest becomes difficult not because the mind is too active, but because it is trying to perform its daytime role in a nighttime environment. The night offers conditions that are unfamiliar to the thinking mind. There is no immediate feedback, no clear problem to solve, no external confirmation of progress. Without structure, the mind fills the space with its own material. What it presents may feel important, even urgent, simply because nothing else competes for attention. Urgency at night is often deceptive. Thoughts gain intensity not from their truth, but from the quiet around them. Without contrast, everything appears louder. Without movement, everything feels closer. The mind interprets this closeness as significance, even when the content itself has not changed. A minor concern can feel overwhelming. A passing thought can seem definitive. A possibility can be mistaken for a certainty. This is not because the mind is unreliable, but because it is operating without the balance that daytime structure provides. Understanding this dynamic changes the experience of night. Instead of seeing rising thoughts as obstacles to rest, they can be recognized as signs of transition. The mind is changing modes, not malfunctioning. It is moving from outward engagement to inward processing, and that movement takes time. Processing does not require participation. The mind may present material, but it does not demand response. Awareness alone is often sufficient. When thoughts are allowed to surface without being followed, their momentum gradually slows. Pressure decreases. Narratives lose their grip. The mind begins to reorganize itself without force. The night does not require conclusions. It does not ask for clarity, certainty, or resolution. It provides a space where unfinished material can exist without consequence. What remains unresolved is not ignored. It is simply allowed to wait. When the day ends, the mind begins not to burden, but to release what could not be carried openly before. The challenge is not to silence this beginning, but to recognize that it does not define what must come next. Rest emerges when the mind understands that it is no longer responsible for holding everything together. In that recognition, effort softens, attention settles. The night fulfills its quiet purpose, not as a place of struggle, but as a gentle passage toward stillness. When the mind is tired, it does not simply rest. It explains. It connects. It fills gaps. In the absence of clear direction, it begins to assemble meaning from fragments, weaving impressions into narratives that feel complete even when they are not. This is not a deliberate act. It happens quietly, almost automatically, as the mind searches for coherence in the dark. Stories emerge because the mind is built to make sense of experience. During the day, this ability serves a practical purpose. It helps interpret signals, anticipate outcomes, and respond efficiently. At night, however, the same function turns inward. With fewer external cues, the mind begins to narrate its own contents. A memory appears, then another. A sensation connects to a thought. A concern links itself to an imagined outcome. Soon, what began as a single impression expands into a full narrative. These stories feel personal and immediate. They seem to describe reality as it is, rather than as it is being imagined. Fatigue gives these narratives their power. When the mind is rested, it can question its own constructions. It can pause, reconsider, and revise. When it is tired, it lacks that flexibility. It accepts its own explanations without scrutiny. The story feels true not because it has been examined, but because it has not been challenged. This is how ordinary thoughts gain emotional weight. A passing doubt becomes a pattern. An unresolved feeling becomes a conclusion. The mind fills uncertainty with interpretation, and interpretation with emotion. The result is a story that feels convincing precisely because it explains discomfort, even if it does not reflect reality. These inner narratives often follow familiar paths. They return to the same themes, the same concerns, the same unresolved questions. They replay conversations, reimagine outcomes, and rehearse responses that may never be needed. The repetition gives them a sense of importance. If a thought returns often, it must matter, or so the mind assumes. Yet repetition is not evidence of truth. It is often evidence of fatigue. The mind circles the same material because it lacks the energy to move beyond it. What feels like urgency is frequently inertia. What feels like insight may simply be the mind revisiting what it already knows. The danger is not that the mind tells stories. The danger is mistaking those stories for instructions. When a narrative is followed rather than observed, it begins to shape perception. Attention narrows, emotional responses intensify. The body reacts, as if the imagined scenario were already unfolding. This process happens quickly and quietly. A thought arises. It is accepted. It expands. Soon, the mind is no longer noticing thoughts, it is living inside them. The story becomes the environment, and everything else fades into the background. Awareness interrupts this process, not by arguing with the story, but by stepping back from it. When a thought is seen as a construction rather than a command, its grip loosens. The story may continue to exist, but it no longer defines the moment. It is important to understand that these stories are not intentional deceptions. They are attempts at order. The mind seeks to reduce uncertainty by creating explanations. When clarity is unavailable, it chooses coherence instead. A complete story, even an inaccurate one, feels safer than ambiguity. Night amplifies this tendency. Without external reference points, the mind relies more heavily on its internal narratives. The quieter the surroundings, the louder the story appears. The stillness gives it space to unfold without interruption. But stillness also offers perspective. In the absence of action, it becomes possible to notice the story as a story. The gap between thought and reality becomes visible. What once felt urgent begins to feel provisional. The mind does not need to be corrected in these moments. It needs to be recognized. Stories lose their power when they are acknowledged as temporary constructions rather than final truths. The act of noticing creates distance, and distance restores balance. When the mind is allowed to tell its stories without being believed, something changes. The narrative slows. The emotional charge weakens. The story may repeat, but it does so with less intensity. It becomes background rather than foreground. Rest does not require the end of storytelling. It requires the end of identification. Peace emerges not when the mind stops creating narratives, but when those narratives are no longer mistaken for reality itself. A tired mind creates stories because it is seeking relief. When it finds understanding instead, the need to insist begins to fade. Long before the rhythm of modern life accelerated, the inner struggle of the human mind was already recognized. It was observed quietly, without urgency, by those who paid attention not only to events, but to the way the mind responds to them. They did not rely on constant stimulation or distraction to understand this struggle. Stillness itself was enough to reveal it. These observers understood something essential. The mind does not become unsettled without cause. Its turbulence is rarely random. More often, it is a response to imbalance rather than a sign of failure. When effort extends beyond recovery, when attention is demanded without pause, the inner world begins to strain. This strain does not always show itself immediately. It waits, gathering beneath the surface until conditions allow it to appear. During periods of activity, the mind adapts in order to function. It narrows its focus. It prioritizes what is necessary. It postpones what cannot be handled in the moment. This adaptation allows life to continue smoothly, but it carries a quiet cost. What is postponed does not dissolve. It accumulates, layer by layer, beyond immediate awareness. Ancient observers noticed a recurring pattern. Inner unrest often emerged, not during hardship itself, but afterward. Not in the middle of action, but in the pause that followed it. When danger passed, when labor ended, when silence returned. It was in these moments that the mind revealed its fatigue. They understood that this emergence was not disorder, but release. The mind, like the body, requires intervals of restoration. When those intervals are delayed, tension builds silently. When rest finally arrives, the release can feel abrupt, intense, even overwhelming, not because something new has appeared, but because what was held back has finally been allowed to move. This understanding reshaped how inner disturbance was interpreted. Rather than viewing restless thoughts as enemies to be defeated, they were seen as signals, indicators of imbalance, rather than proof of weakness. The mind was not to be forced into silence, but gently guided back into proportion. One of the most important distinctions they recognized was the difference between what appears and what is true. Thoughts were understood as events within awareness, not definitive statements about reality. A tired mind might speak urgently, but urgency alone was never considered evidence of accuracy. Intensity did not equal truth. This recognition required discipline, but not force. It involved learning to observe without immediately responding, to notice the content of the mind without becoming absorbed by it. This practice did not eliminate inner struggle, but it softened its impact. It changed the relationship between awareness and thought. They also observed the role of judgment in intensifying distress. When a thought was labeled as dangerous, unacceptable, or wrong, resistance followed naturally. Resistance created tension. That tension fed the disturbance it sought to eliminate. In this way, the struggle became self-sustaining, fueled by the attempt to control it. Instead, a posture of neutrality was encouraged. Thoughts could be acknowledged without endorsement. Feelings could be felt without explanation. Experiences could be noticed without immediate interpretation. This approach reduced friction within the mind, allowing it to settle through understanding rather than suppression. Another key insight concerned the effect of fatigue on perception. A rested mind could hold uncertainty without urgency. It could allow complexity to remain unresolved. A tired mind, by contrast, simplified experience into extremes. Subtlety disappeared. Everything felt heavier, more absolute, more final. This shift was not moral or psychological failure, but a physiological one. Recognizing this removed unnecessary self-criticism. If perception changed with fatigue, then inner disturbance was not a reflection of character, but of condition. Rest was no longer viewed as avoidance or weakness, but as a form of wisdom. Recovery was understood as essential to clarity. Silence itself was seen differently. It was not empty. It was revealing. When the noise of activity faded, the mind showed what it carried. This revelation was not meant to alarm, but to inform. It pointed to where attention had been strained, where effort had exceeded balance, and where care was needed. They did not seek to dominate the mind. They sought to understand it. Control was considered a crude response to a subtle process. Guidance, by contrast, worked with the mind's natural tendencies instead of against them. This approach required patience. Inner balance could not be rushed. The mind settled in its own time when pressure was removed. Attempts to force calm often produced the opposite effect, creating more agitation and resistance. The ancient awareness of inner struggle rested on a simple principle. Peace is not achieved by erasing thoughts, but by restoring proportion. When effort and rest are balanced, when attention is no longer overextended, the mind gradually returns to its natural clarity. In this understanding, the night was not an enemy. It was a teacher. It revealed what the day concealed, and when its lessons were met without fear or resistance, the struggle it exposed began to soften on its own. The mind did not need correction. It needed space. Attention is not neutral. Where it rests, weight follows. What receives sustained focus begins to feel heavier, closer, more demanding. This is not because the object of attention has changed, but because attention itself amplifies what it touches. The mind rarely suffers from the presence of thoughts alone. It suffers from the way attention becomes entangled with them. During the day, attention is guided by function. It moves from task to task, problem to problem, rarely lingering long enough to accumulate emotional weight. Judgment remains practical. Decisions are made quickly, often without reflection. This efficiency keeps attention light, even when demands are high. At night, that structure dissolves. Attention is no longer directed outward by necessity. Without a clear destination, it settles inward. What it encounters there feels different, not because it is different, but because attention has slowed. When attention stops moving, it begins to sink. This is where judgment quietly enters. A thought appears, and almost immediately it is evaluated. Is it acceptable? Is it dangerous? Does it mean something? Judgment assigns value before understanding has time to form. Once a thought is judged, attention tightens around it. The inner weight begins to grow. Judgment creates gravity. A neutral thought carries little force. A judged thought carries consequence. The mind reacts not to the thought itself, but to the meaning assigned to it. What was once a passing impression becomes a problem to solve, a threat to address, or a signal to interpret. This process is subtle and fast. Often it happens before awareness catches up. A thought arises, judgment follows, attention locks in place. Soon, the mind feels burdened without knowing why. The weight seems to come from nowhere, but it is the product of this sequence. The inner weight people feel at night is rarely caused by new information. It is caused by attention held too tightly and judgment applied too quickly. When attention remains fixed and judgment remains active, the mind cannot release what it is holding. Fatigue intensifies this effect. A tired mind judges more harshly and holds more rigidly. It lacks the flexibility to let thoughts pass without engagement. What might have been dismissed during the day becomes significant at night, not because it has grown, but because the mind has less capacity to carry it lightly. This is why certain thoughts feel heavier after dark, not because they are more important, but because attention is no longer dispersed. With fewer distractions, attention concentrates, and concentration magnifies whatever it touches. Judgment reinforces this magnification. Once A thought is labeled as meaningful or concerning. Attention treats it as such. The mind begins to circle it, revisiting the same angles, searching for resolution. The repetition adds mass. The thought grows heavier not through depth but through accumulation. Understanding this changes the relationship to inner weight. The solution is not to remove thoughts or silence judgment entirely. It is to notice the moment judgment appears and to soften attention before it hardens. When attention loosens, weight diminishes. This does not require force. Force creates resistance, and resistance adds weight. What is needed is a shift in posture from grasping to allowing. Attention can remain present without pressing inward. Judgment can be noticed without being obeyed. A thought can be seen without being evaluated. When evaluation pauses, even briefly, attention relaxes. The mind experiences space again. What felt dense begins to feel movable. What felt fixed begins to change. This is not indifference. It is discernment without urgency. It allows thoughts to exist without assigning them authority. The mind regains its ability to hold experience lightly. Inner weight decreases when attention is freed from obligation. Thoughts no longer demand response. They are allowed to pass through awareness without settling. Judgment loses its grip when it is seen as an impulse rather than a directive. Over time, this shift changes the texture of the night. Thoughts may still arise. Attention may still wander. But the heaviness that once accompanied them fades. The mind learns that not every appearance requires evaluation, and not every evaluation requires action. Peace does not come from perfect attention. It comes from flexible attention. Attention that knows when to engage and when to release. Judgment that knows when to pause. When attention loosens and judgment softens, the inner weight begins to lift. The mind is no longer carrying more than it needs, and in that lightness, rest becomes possible not as an achievement, but as a natural return. One of the most difficult shifts the mind is asked to make is learning how to remain without controlling. From early on, control is presented as a form of safety. To manage, to organize, to anticipate these abilities help navigate the world. They provide structure, predictability, and a sense of agency. During the day, control serves a purpose. It allows action to unfold smoothly. At night, however, the same impulse becomes a source of tension. When the external world quiets, control loses its clear object. There is nothing immediate to manage, nothing urgent to solve. Yet the habit remains. The mind continues searching for something to hold, something to direct, something to fix. In the absence of tasks, it turns inward and attempts to control its own contents. This is where difficulty arises. Thoughts are not designed to be managed in the same way as actions. They appear, shift, and dissolve according to rhythms that do not respond well to force. When the mind tries to organize its own movement, it often tightens instead of settling. Control creates pressure. It introduces effort where none is required. The more the mind tries to arrange itself into calm, the more agitation it generates. Stillness cannot be imposed without contradiction. The attempt to force quiet becomes noise of its own. Learning to remain without controlling begins with recognizing this contradiction. Presence does not require intervention. Awareness does not need direction. To remain simply means to stay with what is present, without trying to change its shape. This is unfamiliar territory for the mind. It has learned to equate usefulness with action. To do nothing feels irresponsible, even unsafe. The absence of control is mistaken for loss, when in reality, It is a different form of stability. Remaining does not mean passivity. It is an active openness. Attention stays present, but it does not grip. It notices without correcting. It allows without endorsing. In this posture, the mind is engaged, but not entangled. Thoughts may still appear. Sensations may still shift. Emotions may rise and fall. None of this violates remaining. What changes is the response. Instead of interference, there is space. Instead of adjustment, there is allowance. The mind often resists this at first. Without control, it fears disorder. It expects chaos. But what emerges instead is a subtle self-regulation. When pressure is removed, thoughts slow naturally. When judgment pauses, emotions move without accumulating weight. Control interrupts this natural process. It freezes what would otherwise pass. By holding on to thoughts, the mind gives them permanence. By trying to resolve emotions, it intensifies them. Remaining allows movement to complete itself. Night offers a unique opportunity to practice this. Without external demands, the mind can experiment with letting go of its usual authority. It can discover that awareness does not collapse when control is released. On the contrary, it becomes more stable. This does not happen all at once. The impulse to control returns repeatedly. Each time it does, it can be noticed without criticism. The noticing itself is enough. There is no need to correct the impulse. Simply seeing it loosens its hold. Over time, remaining becomes less effortful. The mind learns that it does not need to supervise every internal event. It begins to trust the process that unfolds without interference. Thoughts appear and fade. Sensations adjust. The system finds balance on its own. This trust changes the quality of rest. Instead of waiting for silence, the mind allows sound. Instead of seeking emptiness, it allows fullness. Rest becomes compatible with activity, as long as that activity is not controlled. Learning to remain without controlling is not a technique. It is a relationship. A shift from domination to cooperation. The mind stops acting as a manager and becomes a witness. In this role, it carries less weight. Effort decreases. Resistance softens. What once felt unstable begins to feel held, not by control, but by awareness itself. The night no longer feels like a problem to solve. It becomes a space to inhabit. And in that inhabiting, the mind discovers a deeper form of ease, one that does not depend on outcomes, silence, or resolution. Remaining, without controlling, is where rest quietly takes root. Urgency often arrives without warning. It presents itself as a demand that feels immediate, undeniable, and absolute. At night, this sensation becomes especially convincing. A thought appears, and with it comes the feeling that something must be addressed now, that delay is dangerous, that rest is irresponsible, that waiting will make things worse. Yet urgency is rarely what it claims to be. During the day, urgency serves a function. There are moments when action is required, when timing matters, when response cannot be postponed. In those contexts, urgency is aligned with reality. It reflects actual conditions and real consequences. The body and mind respond together, mobilizing attention and energy. At night, however, urgency loses that grounding. The environment no longer demands immediate action. There are no signals requiring response, no external pressures that depend on instant decisions. And yet, the feeling of urgency persists. It arises from within, detached from circumstance, fueled by thought rather than necessity. This is how illusion takes shape. A thought suggests a possibility. The mind interprets it as a problem. Judgment assigns importance. Attention tightens. Soon, the thought is accompanied by a sense of time running out. The urgency feels real because the body responds to it, even though nothing external has changed. The illusion lies not in the thought itself, but in its timing. What appears urgent at night often has no capacity for resolution in that moment. The conditions required for meaningful action, clarity, perspective, energy, are absent. The mind insists anyway, mistaking insistence for effectiveness. Fatigue strengthens this illusion. A tired mind has difficulty distinguishing between immediate and important. It compresses time. Everything feels close, pressing, unresolved. The future collapses into the present, and the present feels overloaded as a result. This compression creates pressure. Thoughts that could wait until morning feel intolerable now. Questions that require distance feel unbearable without answers. The mind equates postponement with failure, even when postponement is the most reasonable response. Urgency feeds on this confusion. It presents itself as responsibility. It frames rest as avoidance. It convinces the mind that vigilance is protection. And because the body is already tired, this vigilance becomes exhausting rather than helpful. What makes the illusion particularly strong at night is the absence of contradiction. During the day, urgency is tested by reality. Action either resolves something or it does not. At night, there is no such feedback. The mind can insist endlessly without consequence, reinforcing the sense that something is at stake. Yet nothing is lost by waiting. The night does not diminish what can be addressed later. It does not erase possibilities or remove options. It simply separates action from imagination. What feels urgent now will still exist tomorrow, often with less intensity and greater clarity. Recognizing urgency as an illusion does not mean ignoring responsibility. It means placing responsibility in its proper context. There is a time for engagement and a time for rest. Confusing the two burdens the mind unnecessarily. The illusion weakens when urgency is questioned, not argued with, but examined. Is there truly something that must be done now, or is the mind reacting to its own discomfort? Often, the urgency dissolves when this question is asked honestly. Urgency depends on identification. When the mind believes it must resolve every appearance, urgency thrives. When the mind allows some things to remain unresolved, urgency loses its authority. This allowance does not create neglect. It creates sequence. Some things belong to the day, others belong to reflection. The night belongs to neither action nor solution. It belongs to recovery. As urgency softens, space returns. Thoughts still arise, but they no longer demand immediate response. The body releases its readiness. Breathing deepens. The mind stops leaning forward into imagined outcomes. The illusion of urgency fades when the present moment is allowed to be sufficient. Nothing is required of it. Nothing is demanded from it. It holds what appears without asking for completion. In this recognition, the night regains its purpose. It is no longer a battleground of unresolved demands, but a pause that restores proportion. Urgency gives way to patience. Pressure yields to time. What felt immediate becomes distant. What felt heavy becomes manageable. And rest, no longer postponed by imagined necessity, becomes possible again. Not everything that appears before the mind is meant to be handled. Some things are within reach, responsive to awareness. influence, and presence in this moment. Others are not. Much of inner tension is born from confusing these two categories, from treating what cannot yet be touched as if it were immediately accessible, and from placing the weight of distant concerns onto the present moment. During the day, this distinction tends to be clearer. Action itself defines limits. Certain efforts produce results, while others do not. The environment provides constant feedback, teaching the mind where attention is effective and where it is wasted. Boundaries are reinforced not through reflection, but through experience. At night, those boundaries begin to dissolve. Without external reference points, the mind no longer receives clear signals about what responds to effort. Thought moves freely, unconstrained by physical limits. A future scenario feels as immediate as a current sensation. A hypothetical outcome feels as real as a tangible condition. Without resistance from reality, imagination loses scale. This loss of scale creates strain. The mind reaches toward answers that require time, toward certainty that depends on circumstances not yet formed, toward resolution that cannot occur without distance. Each reach is met with silence. Nothing responds. Effort returns empty, and frustration quietly accumulates. What is within reach at night is simple, immediate, and often overlooked. Breathing is within reach. Sensation is within reach. The posture of attention is within reach. Awareness itself is within reach. These elements respond instantly, without negotiation or delay. They do not require solutions. They require presence. What is not within reach often appears more compelling. Final answers, guarantees, control over outcomes, explanations that would dissolve uncertainty. These draw attention away from what is available and toward what cannot respond, creating a continuous outward pull. The mind mistakes imagination for access. Just because something can be thought does not mean it can be acted upon. Just because a question exists does not mean it can be answered now. When this distinction collapses, effort is misplaced, and attention becomes trapped. This misplacement is exhausting. Attention tightens around what it cannot influence. The mind presses against invisible boundaries, mistaking resistance for responsibility. The resulting fatigue is not caused by the problem itself, but by the insistence on engaging it prematurely. Understanding reach is not resignation. It is accuracy. It is the precise placement of attention where it can actually land. Effort is not abandoned. It is redirected. When attention rests on what is reachable, it stabilizes. When it withdraws from what is inaccessible, it recovers. There is a crucial difference between noticing and intervening. Thoughts can be noticed without being directed. Emotions can be felt without being resolved. Uncertainty can be acknowledged without being eliminated. Respecting this difference reduces internal friction. Night offers a unique environment to recognize these limits. With no demand for action, the mind can observe its own reaching. It can see how often it attempts to solve what cannot yet be solved. This observation, when unaccompanied by judgment, begins to soften the impulse itself. What lies beyond reach does not need to be rejected. It does not need to be pushed away or silenced. It can remain present as an idea without becoming a burden. Allowing it to exist without engagement removes the pressure to conclude. This allowance changes the texture of thought. Instead of pushing forward, the mind leans back. Instead of projecting into imagined futures, attention settles into immediate experience. The body responds to this shift with subtle release. Shoulders soften, breath deepens, tension loosens without instruction. Fatigue often disguises itself as responsibility. The urge to keep reaching feels like care, like diligence, like commitment. In reality, it is often the mind refusing to recognize its own limits. Honoring those limits is not neglect, it is alignment with reality. When the mind accepts what is within reach, it relaxes. Attention becomes grounded, sensation becomes clearer, awareness regains stability. The system begins to regulate itself again, not through control, but through balance. What remains beyond reach does not disappear. It waits. And, in waiting, it often changes. Time introduces perspective. Distance restores proportion. What felt overwhelming in the dark frequently appears manageable in the light. This recognition removes pressure without removing concern. Care does not require constant engagement. Some things are honored best by being left untouched. Until conditions allow clarity, the night does not demand answers. It establishes a boundary, a quiet reminder that not everything belongs to this moment. Within that boundary, rest becomes possible without abandonment. Knowing what is within reach and what is not limitation. It is discernment. And discernment lightens the weight the mind carries into stillness. Resistance rarely announces itself openly. It appears quietly, disguised as effort, discipline, or responsibility. The mind believes it is protecting itself by pushing against what is present. It tightens, evaluates, and attempts to reshape experience into something more acceptable. In doing so, it creates the very tension it hopes to avoid. The moment itself is neutral. It carries sensation, thought, and circumstance without instruction. Resistance begins when the mind decides that what is here should be different. This judgment introduces friction. The present is no longer allowed to be what it is. It becomes a problem to correct. During the day, resistance often goes unnoticed. Action absorbs attention. Discomfort is overridden by necessity. The mind moves forward, carrying tension without fully feeling it. The cost is deferred rather than eliminated. At night, that cost is collected. When activity slows, resistance has nowhere to hide. The effort of pushing against experience becomes visible. Thoughts loop. The body remains tense without clear reason. The mind searches for escape from a moment it refuses to accept. This search exhausts attention and deepens unrest. Resistance consumes energy without producing change. What is resisted persists. What is fought remains present. The mind presses against reality, but reality does not yield. The result is fatigue layered on top of discomfort. Much of inner suffering comes not from what is happening, but from the refusal to allow it. A sensation becomes painful when it is rejected. A thought becomes oppressive when it is argued with. An emotion intensifies when it is denied permission to exist. The mind believes resistance will lead to relief. It assumes that if the present can be altered, peace will follow. Yet, resistance delays peace by keeping attention locked in conflict. The moment cannot settle because it is being opposed. This opposition often takes subtle forms. The mind reviews alternatives. It imagines better versions of now. It rehearses explanations. It negotiates with itself. All of this activity is aimed at escape, not understanding. The cost of this effort is cumulative. Attention grows rigid. Flexibility disappears. The mind loses its ability to adapt. What began as mild discomfort becomes heaviness through repetition. Resistance also narrows perception. When the mind is focused on what should not be, it loses contact with what is. Sensation fades into the background. Awareness becomes abstract. The present moment is replaced by commentary about it. This separation creates instability. The mind is no longer grounded in experience, but suspended in evaluation. Without grounding, thoughts accelerate. Emotions lose context. Everything feels less contained. Acceptance is often misunderstood in contrast to resistance. It is not agreement. It is not approval. It is simply the cessation of struggle. Acceptance allows the moment to exist without interference. It removes the added layer of conflict. When resistance stops, energy returns. Attention loosens. The body releases what it no longer needs to hold. Thoughts slow, not because they are forced to, but because there is no longer pressure driving them. The present moment responds immediately to acceptance. It becomes lighter, more spacious, less demanding. What was unbearable under resistance becomes manageable when allowed. This does not mean the moment becomes pleasant. It becomes workable. The difference is subtle but decisive. Without resistance, discomfort moves. With resistance, it stagnates. Night exposes the cost of resisting because there is no distraction to mask it. The mind encounters itself directly. Every effort to avoid the present is felt as tension. Every refusal to allow becomes exhaustion. Learning to notice resistance is the beginning of release. Noticing does not require correction. It simply reveals the unnecessary effort being applied. Once seen, resistance often softens on its own. The mind does not need to be persuaded to accept. It needs to see that resistance is costly and ineffective. When this becomes clear, letting go becomes the natural choice. The present moment does not ask for endurance. It asks for permission. Permission to exist without being reshaped. Permission to pass without interference. When resistance ends, the moment completes itself. Sensation resolves. Thought settles. The body rests. What remains is not emptiness, but ease. The cost of resisting the moment is high. The cost of allowing it is low. And in that difference, rest finds its opening. Acceptance begins where resistance ends. Not as surrender, not as approval, but as a clear recognition of what is already here. The present moment has a shape formed by sensation, thought, emotion, and circumstance, and that shape exists whether it is welcomed or opposed. Acceptance does not create it. It simply stops arguing with it. The mind often mistakes acceptance for passivity. It assumes that allowing the present means giving up direction, abandoning intention, or tolerating what should be changed. In reality, acceptance is neither passive nor permissive. It is accurate. It sees the present as it is, without distortion, and responds from that clarity. During the day, the shape of the present is constantly shifting. Action reshapes experience moment by moment. Decisions alter conditions. Movement creates momentum. At night, the shape stabilizes. There is less intervention, fewer interruptions. What remains becomes more visible. This visibility can feel uncomfortable at first. Without activity to reshape experience, the present reveals its contours. Fatigue, tension, unresolved emotion, lingering thought all take form. The mind, accustomed to modification, resists this exposure. Acceptance asks for something different. It asks the mind to stay with what is present without trying to remodel it. This staying does not freeze the moment. It allows the moment to complete itself. The shape of the present is often misunderstood as permanent. A feeling arises, and the mind assumes it will remain. A thought appears, and the mind treats it as defining. Acceptance corrects this misunderstanding. By allowing the present fully, It reveals its transient nature. What is accepted moves. What is resisted stagnates. The present moment resolves itself when it is not held in opposition. Sensations pass. Emotions shift. Thoughts lose momentum. Acceptance restores movement by removing friction. This does not require effort. Effort belongs to resistance. Acceptance is the absence of effort, where effort is unnecessary. It is a release of pressure, not the application of force. The mind often tries to accept selectively. It allows what is comfortable and resists what is not. This partial acceptance keeps conflict alive. The present does not divide itself this way. Its shape is whole. Accepting only parts maintains tension with the rest. Whole acceptance does not mean liking everything that appears. It means allowing everything that appears to be exactly what it is, without demand for immediate change. This allowance creates space. Space creates clarity. Clarity allows response when response is appropriate. Night is uniquely suited to this practice. There is no requirement to act, no demand to decide. The present does not need to be improved before rest can occur. It only needs to be acknowledged. When the shape of the present is accepted, the body responds first. Muscles soften. Breathing deepens. The nervous system receives permission to stand down. These changes happen without instruction, as if the body recognizes safety where the mind has ceased opposition. Thoughts also change. They continue to arise, but without the pressure to define the moment. They pass through awareness like weather through an open landscape. The sky does not need to clear for the weather to move. Acceptance returns authority to experience itself. The mind stops acting as an editor and becomes a witness. In this role, it carries less weight. It no longer needs to manage every detail of the present. This shift reveals something subtle. The present moment is not an obstacle to rest. It is the doorway to it. Resistance stands in front of that doorway. Acceptance opens it. Accepting the shape of the present does not end difficulty. It ends unnecessary struggle. Difficulty is part of experience. Struggle is optional. When struggle falls away, difficulty becomes workable, and often less intense. The present does not demand perfection. It does not ask to be fixed before it can be lived. It simply asks to be met honestly. In this honesty, something settles. The mind stops leaning forward. The body stops bracing. The moment, once resisted, becomes sufficient. Acceptance is not the conclusion of effort. It is the correct placement of effort after clarity, not before it. Action can still come, but it arises from understanding rather than tension. The night welcomes this understanding. It does not rush it. It allows the present to take its shape and complete its cycle. In doing so, rest emerges naturally, without instruction or demand. Accepting the shape of the present is not an achievement. It is a return to what has been here all along, waiting to be allowed. Night is not merely the absence of day. It is a threshold, a passage between modes of being. Something closes, and something else becomes possible. The demands that shaped attention begin to withdraw, not abruptly, but gradually, as if loosening their grip out of understanding rather than force. The night does not confront the day. It succeeds it. Crossing this threshold often goes unnoticed. There is no clear signal, no announcement. Light dims. Sound softens. The body shifts posture. Awareness begins to turn inward. These changes happen quietly, without instruction, guided by rhythms older than intention. The night does not require readiness. It arrives regardless. A threshold is not a destination. It is a space between. On one side lies the world of action, responsibility, and response. On the other lies rest, release, and renewal. Standing at this edge, the mind often hesitates. It carries habits formed in daylight control, urgency, evaluation into a space where they no longer apply. This hesitation creates friction. The mind tries to remain active while the body prepares to disengage. The result is neither action nor rest, but suspension. Thoughts continue to circulate. Attention remains alert. The threshold is crossed physically, but not internally. Night exposes this misalignment. Without the momentum of the day, the mind's habitual patterns become visible. It continues to plan without necessity, to judge without purpose, to anticipate without context. These movements feel out of place, yet they persist because they have not been consciously released. The threshold invites a different posture. It asks for a loosening of grip, a softening of stance. What was necessary before is no longer required now. The night does not reward vigilance. It responds to yielding. Crossing this threshold does not require effort. Effort belongs to the day. The night responds to permission. When the mind allows itself to shift modes, the transition completes itself naturally. This permission is often withheld out of habit. The mind fears losing control, as if stepping into rest means abandoning responsibility. But the threshold does not erase what lies behind it. It simply places it out of reach for a time. What belongs to the day remains intact, waiting on the other side. The night reframes time. It stretches moments. It slows sequence. What felt compressed begins to expand. This expansion can feel unsettling at first, especially to a mind accustomed to pace. Yet within this slower rhythm, perception deepens. At the threshold, awareness changes quality. It becomes less focused, more spacious. Attention no longer needs to track outcomes. It can rest with sensation, with breath, with the simple fact of being present. This shift is subtle, but profound. The body recognizes the threshold more readily than the mind. It releases tension. It adjusts temperature. It prepares for stillness. These responses are not learned. They are remembered. The body crosses the threshold instinctively, while the mind lingers behind. Night offers the mind a chance to follow, not by force, but by imitation. By noticing the body's release, the mind learns that safety does not depend on constant alertness. It learns that vigilance can rest without consequence. A threshold is also a place of uncertainty. It holds neither the clarity of action nor the oblivion of sleep. This in-between space can feel vulnerable. The mind may attempt to fill it with activity, simply to avoid the unfamiliar. But the unfamiliar is precisely what the threshold offers. It is an invitation to experience presence without direction, to exist without agenda, to remain without producing. The night does not demand identity. Roles fade here. Titles lose relevance. What remains is the simple fact of awareness experiencing itself. This simplicity can feel disorienting, but it is also stabilizing. Crossing the threshold means allowing this simplicity. It means letting go of the need to define the moment. The night does not ask who you are or what you have accomplished. It asks only that you arrive. Arrival is not an action. It is a cessation of movement. When striving stops, arrival happens on its own. Within the threshold, the mind begins to reorganize. Without instruction, thoughts slow. Without command, attention broadens. The system recalibrates itself, guided by the absence of pressure. This recalibration is the quiet work of the night. It does not announce progress. It does not provide evidence. Its effects are felt later, often in subtle ways: clarity in the morning, ease in the body, a sense of continuity restored. The night, as a threshold, is not an escape. It is a return to balance, to proportion, to the rhythms that sustain attention without exhausting it. When the threshold is crossed fully, resistance fades. The mind no longer tries to carry the day forward. It allows the night to complete its function. What needs to be held is held. What needs to be released is released. The threshold closes gently behind you, not to trap, but to protect. The night becomes a space where nothing is required, and because nothing is required, everything can settle. Rest is often misunderstood as silence. The mind imagines it as an empty space, free of movement, free of images, free of commentary. When thoughts continue to appear, rest is judged as incomplete, delayed, or failed. This misunderstanding creates pressure, and pressure moves the mind further from rest rather than closer to it. Thought is not the opposite of rest. Struggle is. The mind is not designed to shut down completely on command. It processes, associates, remembers, anticipates. These functions do not disappear simply because the body becomes still. Expecting the mind to empty itself before rest can begin places a condition on rest that is rarely met. Night exposes this expectation. When the body slows and the environment quiets, thought becomes more noticeable. Without external distraction, the mind's activity stands out. This visibility is often mistaken for disturbance, even when the mind is doing nothing more than releasing what it has carried. Rest does not require the mind to stop producing content. It requires the mind to stop interfering with its own movement. When thoughts are allowed to arise without being evaluated, directed, or resisted, they lose urgency. They become background rather than center. The pressure to eliminate thought keeps the mind alert. It turns rest into a task, something to be achieved through effort. This effort contradicts the very state it seeks to produce. The more the mind tries to quiet itself, the more active it becomes. Allowing thought is different from engaging with it. A thought can appear without being followed. It can pass through awareness without being turned into a problem or a project. This distinction changes everything. When thoughts are engaged, attention narrows. The mind enters problem-solving mode. It analyzes, evaluates, and anticipates. This mode belongs to action, not rest. When thoughts are allowed instead, attention widens. The mind remains aware without becoming involved. This widening creates space. Thoughts continue, but they move within a larger field. They no longer define the entire experience. Sensation, breath, and stillness coexist with them. Rest emerges from this coexistence. It is not fragile. It does not require perfect conditions. It can exist alongside mental activity as long as that activity is not resisted or pursued. The body understands this naturally. It does not wait for silence to release tension. It responds to safety, not emptiness. When the mind stops demanding control, the body recognizes permission and begins to rest. Many people attempt to rest by monitoring their minds. They check for silence, measure calm, evaluate progress. This monitoring keeps attention active and prevents settling. Rest does not need supervision. Letting go of supervision is an unfamiliar step. The mind worries that without control, it will spiral. In reality, control often creates the spiral. When allowed, Thought tends to organize itself without force. Thoughts slow when they are not fed. They lose momentum when attention does not grip them. This slowing is gradual, not immediate. It happens in waves, not lines. Rest unfolds in the same way. It is not a switch. It is a process of easing. Each moment of allowance reduces tension slightly. Over time, these reductions accumulate. The absence of thought is not a requirement for peace. Peace depends on relationship, not content. A mind at ease can host many thoughts without disturbance. A mind in conflict can be agitated by a single one. Night teaches this lesson quietly. It does not demand silence. It offers stillness. Stillness is not the lack of activity, but the absence of resistance to activity. When rest is understood this way, anxiety softens. Thoughts no longer signal failure. They become part of the unwinding process. The mind is no longer at war with itself. This understanding removes urgency. There is no need to hurry toward quiet. Quiet arrives on its own when it is not chased. The mind settles because it is no longer being pressured to do so. Rest is not something the mind produces. It is something that happens when interference stops. The less the mind tries to manage itself, the more space it creates for ease. The night supports this process by reducing demands. It gives permission for thought to drift, for attention to widen, for effort to fall away. Nothing needs to be resolved for rest to begin. Thoughts may continue to pass through awareness. They do not block rest unless they are treated as obstacles. When allowed, they become part of the landscape rather than interruptions. Rest does not arrive with silence as a condition. It arrives with understanding. When the mind learns that it does not need to be empty to be at ease, the struggle ends. And when the struggle ends, rest is already there. Tomorrow has a quiet way of pulling the mind forward. Even as the body begins to settle, attention leans ahead, rehearsing what has not yet arrived. Plans form without invitation. Questions surface without urgency, then slowly acquire it. Possibilities multiply, each one asking to be considered, prepared for, or resolved before the present has fully released its hold. This forward pull is often mistaken for responsibility. The mind believes it is being careful by anticipating what comes next. It assumes that thinking ahead is a form of protection, that readiness requires rehearsal. During the day, this tendency has value. It helps organize action, avoid surprises, and maintain continuity. At night, the same tendency becomes a weight. The conditions that make anticipation useful are no longer present. Energy is lower. Perspective is narrowed by fatigue. Emotional sensitivity is heightened. Yet the mind continues projecting itself forward, attempting to secure outcomes that cannot be secured from this state. This projection creates a subtle tension. Attention leaves the present moment, but does not arrive anywhere useful. It hovers in imagined futures, trying to resolve situations that require time, distance, and clarity. The mind feels busy but unproductive, engaged but unsatisfied. In this state, the night begins to feel like an interruption. Rest appears secondary, even irresponsible, compared to the imagined demands of tomorrow. The mind treats sleep as a delay rather than a necessity, as if pausing would somehow compromise what lies ahead. Letting tomorrow wait directly challenges this assumption. It does not mean forgetting the future. It means restoring sequence. Some things belong to tomorrow by their nature. They cannot be clarified tonight, no matter how thoroughly they are examined. Treating them as present responsibilities confuses timing and drains attention. The mind resists this because it fears loss of control. If tomorrow is not addressed now, something might be missed. Something might go wrong. This fear keeps attention alert long after alertness serves any purpose. Yet, the night offers a different form of safety. It protects the present from being overloaded. It creates a boundary between what can be addressed now and what requires distance. Within this boundary, the mind can rest without abandoning what lies ahead. Anticipation collapses time. It pulls tomorrow into tonight, crowding the present with obligations that do not belong to it. Letting tomorrow wait restores spacing. It returns time to its natural order, where each moment carries only what it can hold. This restoration brings relief that is often immediate. The mind no longer needs to carry multiple moments at once. It can remain where it is without denying where it will be. The future does not disappear. It simply steps back into its proper place. Fatigue intensifies the illusion of urgency about tomorrow. When energy is low, uncertainty feels threatening. The mind compensates by trying to predict and prepare. Ironically, this effort consumes the very resources needed for clear thinking. Letting tomorrow wait is an act of trust, but not blind trust. It is practical trust in sequence and rhythm. It acknowledges that tomorrow will arrive with its own conditions, its own energy, its own information. What cannot be handled now will be handled then, often with far greater clarity. This trust quiets mental noise. Questions that felt pressing lose their edge when they are allowed to remain unanswered. Scenarios soften when they are no longer rehearsed repeatedly. The mind releases its grip on outcomes it cannot yet influence. As tomorrow steps back, the present expands. Attention settles into immediate experience, breath, bodily sensation, the simple fact of being here. These elements respond to awareness. They do not demand planning or prediction. They anchor attention naturally. The body responds to this shift almost immediately. When the mind stops leaning forward, muscles soften, breathing deepens. The nervous system recognizes that vigilance is no longer required. The signal to rest becomes clear. Letting tomorrow wait does not remove care. It refines it. Care is expressed through respect for timing, not through constant engagement. The night reinforces this lesson without argument. It limits what can be done, not as punishment, but as guidance. It reminds the mind that not every moment is meant for preparation or decision. When tomorrow is allowed to wait, the night fulfills its purpose. It becomes a space of restoration rather than rehearsal. The mind stops practicing outcomes and begins restoring balance. This restoration prepares tomorrow more effectively than anticipation ever could. A rested mind meets the future with flexibility. A fatigued mind meets it with rigidity. Letting tomorrow wait preserves the conditions needed for clear response. The future does not require constant attention to arrive. It arrives regardless. What it needs is a mind that has not exhausted itself by trying to meet it too early. Tonight does not belong to tomorrow. It belongs to release. It belongs to spacing. It belongs to the quiet reordering that happens when the mind stops reaching ahead. Letting tomorrow wait is not delay. It is alignment with time. And in that alignment, rest finally takes its place. The body understands rest before the mind does. It does not reason its way into release. It responds to signals safety, stillness, permission. Long before the mind agrees that it can let go, the body is already preparing to do so, quietly adjusting its posture, its breath, its tone. Throughout the day, the body adapts continuously. It holds tension to meet demand. It stabilizes to support action. It tightens and braces as required, not as a preference, but as a response to circumstance. This effort is intelligent and necessary, yet it is not meant to be permanent. When night arrives, the body begins to reverse this process, not abruptly, but gradually. Muscles soften in small increments. Breathing shifts without instruction. Weight settles downward. These changes occur even when the mind remains active, because the body follows a different logic, one that is responsive rather than anticipatory. The body does not wait for perfect conditions to release. It releases when it senses that holding is no longer required. This sensing is subtle. It depends less on thought and more on atmosphere. Dimmer light, reduced sound, stillness. These cues tell the body that the environment has changed. Often, the mind interrupts this process. It questions the release. It evaluates readiness. It worries that letting go might be premature or unsafe. In doing so, the body hesitates, unsure whether to follow its own intelligence or the mind's caution. This hesitation keeps tension in place, not because the body cannot release, but because it is being asked to remain alert. The result is a familiar feeling of fatigue, without rest of lying still while remaining internally braced. The body does not need instruction to release. It needs permission. Permission is not given through effort, but through non-interference. When the mind stops supervising the process, the body resumes what it already knows how to do. Release begins locally. A jaw loosens. Shoulders drop slightly. The breath deepens by a fraction. These changes may seem insignificant, but they accumulate. Each small release signals the nervous system that it can proceed further. The body releases in layers. Surface tension often goes first. Deeper holding follows more slowly. This sequence cannot be rushed. Attempting to force it usually has the opposite effect, triggering resistance instead of ease. Trusting the body means allowing this timing. It means recognizing that the body has carried the day faithfully and knows when it can put it down. Interference delays what trust accelerates. The body also holds what the mind avoids. Unexpressed emotion, unacknowledged strain, accumulated stress, these often register physically. Tightness is not always a problem to solve. Sometimes it is information completing its cycle. When allowed, the body processes this information through sensation. Heat, heaviness, subtle movement. These are signs of release in progress. They do not require interpretation. They only require space. The mind often misreads these sensations as discomfort. It attempts to eliminate them, not realizing that they are part of unwinding. The body releases through feeling, not through avoidance. Night provides the conditions for this unwinding. Reduced stimulation allows the body's signals to be noticed without being overwhelmed. In this quieter environment, release can proceed without interruption. As the body releases, the mind is invited to follow, not by instruction, but by observation. When the mind notices the body softening, it receives evidence that letting go is safe. This evidence is more convincing than argument. The relationship between mind and body shifts here. Control gives way to cooperation. The mind stops leading and begins accompanying. In this partnership, effort decreases. The body does not need to be convinced of rest. It remembers rest. It has practiced it countless times. What it needs is the absence of contradiction. When the body is allowed to release fully, the effects extend beyond sensation. Breathing becomes rhythmic, heart rate slows, the sense of time stretches. These changes signal a deeper transition, one that prepares the entire system for renewal. Release is not collapse. It is not loss of structure. It is reorganization. The body rearranges itself into a state that requires less energy to maintain. In doing so, it conserves what will be needed later. The night supports this reorganization without demand. It does not ask the body to perform. It allows it to recover. Trusting the body's capacity to release is an act of alignment. It means stepping out of the way of a process that is already underway. When this trust is present, rest deepens naturally. The body that knows how to release does not need to be fixed. It needs to be allowed, and when it is allowed, the transition into rest becomes gentle, steady, and complete. Surrender is often misunderstood as loss. The word carries the weight of failure, of giving up ground, of yielding to something stronger. In the mind, surrender is associated with defeat, weakness, or resignation. Yet this understanding comes from a context of struggle, one where opposing forces compete for control. The surrender asked of the night is different. It does not occur between enemies. It happens within a single system that has been holding too much for too long. Surrender here is not collapse. It is release. It is the decision to stop applying force where force no longer serves. Throughout the day, effort is rewarded. Persistence solves problems. Control produces results. Resistance pushes through obstacles. These strategies are necessary in the realm of action. But when the day ends, continuing to apply them becomes counterproductive. Night changes the terms of engagement. There is nothing to overcome, no obstacle to defeat, no outcome to secure. When effort continues anyway, it has no place to land. It turns inward, becoming tension rather than progress. Surrender in this context is not passive. It is an active recognition that the conditions have shifted. What was effective before is no longer appropriate now. To continue forcing is not strength. It is misalignment. True surrender requires discernment. It recognizes the difference between what must be held and what can be released. It does not abandon responsibility. It sets it down temporarily. The weight is not dropped forever, only until it can be carried again with steadier hands. The mind resists this distinction at first. It fears that surrender will erase momentum, that letting go will undo what has been built. But the night does not dismantle the day. It preserves it by allowing recovery. There is no defeat in pausing effort. Defeat implies an opposing force. Here, the only force being surrendered is unnecessary strain. The mind is not conceding ground. It is reclaiming balance. Surrender becomes possible when resistance is seen clearly, not as virtue, but as habit. The mind has learned to equate tension with care, vigilance with responsibility. Letting go feels irresponsible only because the habit has not been questioned. The body often leads this surrender. It softens before permission is given. It releases before understanding arrives. In its language, surrender is natural. It knows when holding is no longer required. When the mind follows the body's lead, surrender stops feeling like loss. It begins to feel like relief. Muscles loosen, breath deepens. The system recognizes that safety does not depend on constant effort. Surrender does not eliminate awareness. It changes its quality. Attention widens. Instead of scanning for threats, it rests with presence. Instead of managing outcomes, it observes experience as it unfolds. This observation is stable. It does not drift or disengage. It simply stops interfering. In this state, the mind remains awake without being tense. The fear beneath resistance often dissolves here. The mind discovers that nothing collapses when effort stops. Thoughts continue. Sensations continue. Awareness remains intact. What disappears is unnecessary pressure. Surrender without defeat allows the night to do its work. Recovery begins where struggle ends. Restoration follows release, not control. This surrender is reversible. It does not lock the system into passivity. When the day returns, effort can resume. Action can be taken again, often with greater clarity because the system has rested. What is surrendered is not capability, but timing. The mind learns that there is a moment for holding and a moment for releasing. Strength lies in knowing the difference. Night teaches this lesson gently. It does not force surrender. It waits for it. When resistance becomes too tiring to maintain, surrender arrives naturally. In that arrival, something shifts. The mind stops defending. The body stops bracing. The present moment no longer feels like something to endure. Surrender without defeat restores dignity to rest. It removes the idea that rest must be earned through exhaustion. It recognizes rest as a necessary phase, not a reward. This form of surrender does not diminish the self. It returns it to proportion. Effort becomes available again because it is no longer being wasted. The night welcomes this surrender. It holds it without judgment. In that holding, the system recalibrates itself, quietly preparing for what comes next. Surrender here is not an ending. It is a transition. And in that transition, rest deepens not because the mind has been conquered, but because it has been allowed to stand down. An inner shelter is not a place the mind must construct. It is a space that becomes available when pressure is removed. It does not appear through effort or concentration, but through relief. When the constant demand to manage experience fades, something protective emerges on its own. This shelter is not separation from reality. It is a way of being within reality, without being exposed to constant strain. The mind often imagines protection as withdrawal, as distance, as walls. The inner shelter works differently. It allows contact without vulnerability, presence without overload. During the day, this shelter is rarely felt. Attention is outward. Engagement is constant. The inner world adapts by becoming functional rather than protective. The shelter is not needed when momentum carries everything forward. At night, the need becomes clear. As activity diminishes, the mind becomes more sensitive. Without distraction, stimuli that were manageable during the day feel sharper. Thoughts linger longer. Sensations feel closer. Emotions surface more easily. The inner shelter responds to this sensitivity by providing containment. Containment does not restrict movement. It creates boundaries that allow movement to occur safely. Within the shelter, thoughts can arise without overwhelming attention. Emotions can be felt without flooding awareness. Sensations can pass through without demanding interpretation. The inner shelter is recognized by a shift in tone. The mind feels held rather than exposed. Experience feels closer without being intrusive. There is a sense of being inside something supportive, even though nothing external has changed. This sense of shelter emerges when resistance has ended. Resistance leaves the system exposed, constantly pushing against experience. When resistance falls away, the energy it consumed becomes available for support instead of defense. The shelter is not created by thought. Attempts to imagine safety often backfire, drawing attention back into control. The inner shelter appears when the mind stops directing and allows itself to be supported by awareness itself. Within this shelter, urgency loses power. The mind no longer feels chased by its own contents. Thoughts can move slowly. Silence can appear and disappear without pressure. The shelter absorbs intensity without amplifying it. The body recognizes this space immediately. Breathing becomes steady. Muscles remain soft. There is no need to brace. The nervous system senses containment and responds by settling deeper. The inner shelter also changes how time is experienced. Moments no longer rush past or pile up. There is a sense of continuity without demand. Time becomes something you are inside of, rather than something pushing you forward. This shelter does not exclude difficulty. It allows difficulty to exist without escalation. A feeling can be uncomfortable without becoming intolerable. A thought can be unresolved without becoming urgent. The shelter holds experience in proportion. Many confuse this state with avoidance, but avoidance rejects experience. The inner shelter includes it. It provides a space where experience can occur fully without harming the system. Night strengthens access to this shelter because external demands have receded. The mind no longer needs to protect itself through alertness. It can allow awareness to take on the role of containment. This containment is subtle but reliable. It does not require maintenance. Once accessed, it remains as long as interference does not return. Control weakens it. Judgment thins it. Allowance sustains it. Within the inner shelter, identity softens. Roles, expectations, and narratives lose their grip. What remains is a simple sense of being present without definition. This simplicity is stabilizing rather than empty. The shelter does not isolate. It connects inwardly. The mind is no longer scattered across possibilities. Attention gathers naturally, not through effort, but through safety. Rest deepens in this environment, not because thoughts stop, but because they no longer threaten stability. The mind understands that it is protected even while remaining open. The inner shelter is always available. It is not created by night, but night makes it easier to recognize. When effort ceases and resistance dissolves, the shelter reveals itself. This shelter does not need to be held. It holds you. And in that holding, the system recovers its balance without instruction. The night invites you into this space gently. It does not rush the entry. It waits. And when the mind steps inside without force, without demand, the shelter closes quietly, not to confine, but to restore. There is a form of presence that does not announce itself. It does not interrupt thought or replace sensation. It does not demand attention or offer explanation. It is simply there, steady, patient, and unobtrusive. This quiet presence does not solve problems, yet it sustains what is fragile without effort. Most of the time, it goes unnoticed. The mind is trained to look for activity, for change, for response. Presence that does not act is easily overlooked. It does not compete with urgency or assert itself over noise. It remains available without insisting on recognition. Night makes this presence easier to sense. As stimulation recedes, the background becomes clearer. What once felt empty reveals itself as held. The mind may still move, but beneath its movement, there is a consistency that does not shift. This consistency does not depend on thought, mood, or outcome. It remains even when experience changes. The sustaining quality of this presence lies in its reliability. It does not fluctuate with the content of the mind. Whether thoughts are calm or unsettled, whether emotions are light or heavy, this presence remains unchanged. It does not judge what appears within it. It accommodates. This accommodation is not passive. It is supportive. It provides a field in which experience can occur without overwhelming the system. Thoughts are allowed to rise and fall. Sensations can pass through without accumulation. Nothing needs to be filtered before it is permitted. The mind often searches for support in explanations. It wants reassurance, answers, certainty. The quiet presence offers none of these directly. Instead, it offers something more fundamental: continuity. It does not explain experience. It holds it. Holding does not require effort. The presence does not strain to maintain itself. It does not tire. It does not withdraw when things become uncomfortable. This endurance is what allows the system to rest. When attention settles into this presence, something shifts. The need to control weakens. The impulse to judge softens. The mind feels less alone with its contents. There is a sense of being accompanied even though nothing external has changed. This accompaniment does not interfere. It does not guide thoughts or direct emotions. It simply remains available. In this availability, the mind finds stability without restriction. The sustaining presence is often felt as subtle warmth, spaciousness, or quiet continuity. It does not have a distinct form. It is recognized more by its effect than by its characteristics. Where it is felt, pressure decreases. Where it is acknowledged, urgency fades. Fatigue makes the mind vulnerable to fragmentation. Thoughts pull in different directions. Attention scatters. The quiet presence counteracts this fragmentation by offering a center that does not move. It gathers without effort. This gathering does not force coherence. It allows coherence to return naturally. When experience is held within something stable, it organizes itself without instruction. The mind does not need to assemble order. Order emerges. The presence sustains without requiring belief. It does not depend on interpretation. It does not need to be named or defined. Its function does not change whether it is understood or ignored. Night deepens contact with this presence because resistance has weakened. The mind is less busy defending, less occupied with shaping outcomes. In this openness, presence becomes more apparent. Even discomfort is sustained here. Painful sensations, unresolved thoughts, lingering emotions can exist without escalating. The presence does not remove them, but it prevents them from becoming consuming. This prevention is gentle. It does not suppress, it absorbs. Experience meets a boundary that is flexible rather than rigid. Within that boundary, intensity dissipates instead of accumulating. The quiet presence does not ask for gratitude or recognition. It is not diminished by neglect. It remains as steady at the edges of awareness as it does at the center. When the mind rests into this presence, rest becomes deeper, not because activity has stopped, but because the system no longer carries itself alone. There is a sense of support that does not depend on understanding. This support is what allows true release. Effort can end because something else is holding. Vigilance can soften because stability is not threatened by stillness. The night does not create this presence. It reveals it. What has always been available becomes noticeable when interference fades. The quiet presence that sustains is not dramatic. It does not produce insight or transformation on command. Its value lies in its constancy. It stays when nothing else does. And because it stays, the mind can finally rest. Not in silence, not in emptiness, but in being held without condition. At the end of the day, not everything inside has a name. Thoughts remain unfinished. Feelings linger without clear edges. Sensations carry impressions that never became language. Much of what the inner world holds exists without form, unlabeled, unorganized, unresolved. The mind often believes that what has no form must be clarified before it can be released. It tries to translate sensation into explanation, emotion into narrative, tension into reason. This effort assumes that understanding is a prerequisite for letting go. It is not. What has no form does not ask to be shaped. It asks to be delivered, to be placed somewhere. It no longer has to be carried alone. Delivery is not analysis. It is transfer. It is the act of allowing what is present to rest without requiring definition. The difficulty lies in habit. The mind is trained to resolve, to interpret, to finish. When something remains vague, it feels incomplete, unsafe. The impulse to complete it intensifies, especially at night when the inner world becomes more audible. But not everything can be completed through thought. Some experiences do not resolve through clarity. They resolve through permission. They loosen when they are allowed to exist without demand. Delivering what has no form means releasing the requirement to understand. It means allowing emotion to be emotion without turning it into explanation. Allowing sensation to be sensation without turning it into diagnosis. Allowing thought to be thought without turning it into conclusion. This delivery is not passive. It is an intentional act of placement. The mind stops holding what it cannot shape and places it into awareness itself, into the quiet presence that sustains without condition. Awareness does not ask for coherence. It does not reject ambiguity. It holds without needing resolution. What enters awareness is not processed. It is received. Receiving is enough. When what has no form is delivered in this way, pressure decreases. The mind no longer strains to finish what cannot be finished. The body no longer holds tension in service of explanation. Something subtle releases, not because it was solved, but because it was no longer resisted. The mind often fears this release. It worries that without form, things will linger indefinitely. Yet, what lingers does so because it is being held too tightly. When delivered, movement resumes. Formlessness is not chaos. It is a stage. Experience often passes through a shapeless phase before it settles or dissolves. Interrupting this phase delays completion rather than hastening it. Night supports this process by removing urgency. There is no requirement to make sense of what arises. There is no audience demanding clarity. In this absence, delivery becomes possible. The body responds quickly to this shift. Breathing deepens. Muscles soften. The system recognizes that it no longer needs to maintain tension on behalf of unfinished experience. Delivering what has no form also changes the relationship to memory. Images may appear without context. Feelings may arise without cause. When they are delivered without interrogation, they pass through more gently. This delivery does not erase experience. It integrates it. What is delivered becomes part of a larger field rather than a burden carried at the center. The mind regains space. There is dignity in allowing what cannot yet be spoken to remain unsaid. Not everything needs a voice to be honored. Some things complete themselves in silence. The night understands this. It does not press for articulation. It allows the unsorted, the unclear, the unresolved to rest together without hierarchy. Delivering what has no form is an act of trust. Trust that awareness can hold what the mind cannot manage. Trust that completion does not always require explanation. Trust that release can occur without understanding. This trust reduces effort. The mind stops tightening around ambiguity. It stops bracing against uncertainty. What remains is a quiet readiness to rest. When delivery occurs, something shifts from the center to the periphery. What once demanded attention becomes background. What once felt heavy becomes diffuse. The load lightens. The night does not demand that everything be finished. It offers a place where unfinished things can be set down without consequence. In delivering what has no form, the mind relinquishes the need to resolve every trace of experience. It accepts that some things complete themselves when left alone. This acceptance is not neglect. It is respect for processes that unfold without language. And in that respect, rest deepens not because everything has been understood, but because nothing remains unheld. Rest is often treated as a pause between meaningful moments. It is framed as a break from progress, a temporary suspension before effort resumes. In this view, rest is secondary, useful, perhaps necessary, but separate from the real work of living. This misunderstanding quietly shapes how the mind approaches the night. The process, however, does not stop when activity ends. It changes form. During the day, progress appears visible. Actions lead to outcomes. Decisions produce results. Movement creates direction. The mind recognizes these signs and associates them with advancement. When night arrives and these signals disappear, the mind assumes that nothing is happening. But absence of visibility is not absence of process. Rest is not empty time. It is active in a way that does not announce itself. Beneath stillness, integration occurs. Systems recalibrate. What was fragmented begins to reorganize. This work does not respond to pressure or acceleration. It unfolds only when effort recedes. The mind struggles to accept this because it cannot track it. There are no milestones, no metrics, no immediate feedback. Rest does not confirm itself through productivity. It requires trust in processes that operate outside conscious control. Night invites this trust. As external demands withdraw, the system turns inward. Information gathered during the day is sorted. Sensory input settles. Emotional residue finds context. These movements are subtle, often imperceptible, but essential. Without them, effort accumulates without coherence. The body understands this intuitively. It releases tension not as an end, but as preparation. Muscles soften so they can respond again later. Energy is conserved so it can be redistributed. The body does not rest to stop functioning. It rests to restore function. The mind, however, often resists this role. It fears that rest delays progress, that pausing will cause momentum to be lost. In response, it continues to engage, to plan, to revisit. This engagement interrupts the very processes that would restore clarity. Rest cannot be forced into efficiency. It does not accelerate under demand. It deepens only when left undisturbed. When the mind learns to step back, rest completes its work naturally. This work is cumulative. One night does not resolve everything. Integration happens over time, through repeated cycles of engagement and release. Each period of rest contributes quietly to resilience. Viewing rest as part of the process changes how it is approached. It is no longer something to rush through or earn. It becomes something to allow. The night is no longer a gap to be endured, but a phase with its own function. This understanding removes pressure. There is no need to achieve rest. No need to optimize it. The system already knows what to do when interference stops. Rest also restores proportion. Concerns that felt overwhelming regain scale. Priorities reorder themselves. What mattered intensely during the day often softens by morning, not because it was avoided, but because it was integrated. This integration cannot occur in a state of vigilance. It requires safety. It requires the absence of demand. Rest provides both. The mind often wants reassurance that rest is working. It looks for signs, silence, calm, clarity. When these do not appear immediately, doubt arises. But rest does not always announce its effects. Some of its most important changes are noticed only later, indirectly. A rested system responds differently. Attention is more flexible. Emotion is less reactive. Thought is clearer without being rigid. These shifts are the result of rest doing its quiet work. Night protects this work by limiting access. There is little that can be done. Few decisions can be finalized. This limitation is not deprivation, it is containment. It ensures that restoration is not interrupted by unnecessary effort. Rest as part of the process also reframes fatigue. Fatigue is not a failure to continue. It is a signal to transition. When honored, it leads to recovery. When ignored, it compounds. The process requires both phases. Engagement without rest leads to fragmentation. Rest without engagement leads to stagnation. Together, they create continuity. Night is not a detour from progress. It is a necessary passage. What is restored here becomes available later. What is integrated here supports future action. Understanding this allows the mind to release urgency. Nothing essential is lost by resting. In fact, much is preserved. When rest is recognized as part of the process, it is no longer resisted. The mind stops negotiating with stillness. It allows the night to complete its function. In this allowance, the system settles, not because everything has been resolved, but because resolution is no longer being forced. Rest does not interrupt the process. It is the process, continuing quietly when effort has stepped aside. Peace is often imagined as something to be achieved, a destination to reach, a condition to maintain, a state that must be protected through effort and vigilance. The mind approaches peace the same way it approaches tasks, by planning, monitoring, and correcting. When peace does not arrive on command, frustration grows and the effort intensifies. Yet the peace revealed through the night does not respond to effort. It does not arrive through control. It appears when control loosens. Peace is not created by managing experience. It is uncovered when management ends. It has never been absent. It has simply been obscured by interference. Throughout this passage, a pattern becomes clear. Control tightens what it tries to secure. Resistance amplifies what it tries to eliminate. Effort weighs down what it hopes to lighten. Again and again, the mind discovers that the more it intervenes, the less ease it allows. Peace that does not need control emerges from a different relationship with experience. Instead of shaping the moment, the mind meets it. Instead of directing attention, it accompanies it. Instead of supervising every movement, it allows movement to complete itself. This peace does not require silence. Thoughts may still pass through awareness. Sensations may still change. Emotions may still rise and fall. None of these disturb peace when they are no longer treated as problems to solve or signals to interpret. The absence of control does not invite chaos. It reveals an underlying order that does not depend on direction. When interference stops, systems regulate themselves. Attention finds balance without instruction. The body releases what it no longer needs to hold. The mind settles because it is no longer being pushed. This is not resignation. It is alignment. Control is useful when action is required. It becomes harmful when applied to what must unfold on its own. Peace appears when the mind learns to distinguish between these moments. The night teaches this lesson without argument. It removes options. It reduces demands. It limits the range of action. In doing so, it exposes how much effort was unnecessary. What remains, when effort falls away, is not emptiness, but stability. Peace without control feels different from peace achieved through management. It is quieter, broader, less personal. It does not depend on mood or circumstance. It does not disappear when conditions change. It remains because it is not built on conditions. This peace does not ask to be defended. It does not need vigilance to survive. It is not threatened by uncertainty. It does not require guarantees to exist. It is steady because it is not constructed. The mind often expects peace to be dramatic, a clear signal, a sudden calm, a decisive shift. Peace that does not need control is subtler. It is recognized not by what appears, but by what no longer presses. Less urgency, less bracing, less inner negotiation. Attention no longer leans forward or pulls back. It stays where it is. This staying does not feel forced. It feels natural, as if nothing else is required. In this peace, responsibility is not lost. It is placed in time. What belongs to action waits for action. What belongs to rest remains at rest. The mind no longer carries every moment at once. Peace without control restores dignity to the present. The present moment is no longer treated as a problem to improve or a gap to fill. It becomes sufficient without explanation. This peace is not an escape from life. It is a return to it without the added burden of constant management. Life continues, but with less friction. Experience unfolds without being shaped into acceptable forms. The night completes this cycle gently, not with instruction, not with demand, but with permission. Permission to stop holding, permission to stop deciding, permission to stop monitoring. Nothing needs to be concluded for peace to remain. Nothing needs to be finished. Nothing needs to be resolved. What was carried can be set down without ceremony. What has been released stays released. What has been allowed continues to move. What has been trusted completes itself in its own rhythm. Peace that does not need control is not something to keep. It is something the mind stops interrupting. As the night deepens, this peace remains quiet, steady, unchanged by thought or silence. It does not ask for attention. It does not demand belief. It simply stays. And in that staying, rest completes its work.